Brett mentions that Crawford may not be long for the team because when Edman gets back, I want to see him back up shortstop at this point. Scott cannot leave center field. Here's the thing about that, though. The reason that Crawford was brought in, knowing that they had Victor Scott in the minors potentially ready to come up soon, was because they wanted Edman to not have to be the backup shortstop. Now, did they at the time anticipate that Victor Scott could be an everyday center fielder right now in the big leagues and could take that job and run with it? Perhaps not. I think at the time before they signed Crawford, I was thinking outside the box a little bit like that and saying, well, if you're going to have these roles, what about a Thomas Sajaci? Like, what about some of these other guys that could maybe mix in and you could find a way before they went and committed to Brenden Crawford? But once they did that, I mean, they gave him a couple $1,000,000, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember the exact reported salary, but it's not nothing. And so I just think there are other moves that are going to be made certainly before that one. And Brenden Crawford, by all accounts, has been, doing what the Cardinals have asked of him. Just because you don't see him much doesn't mean that they're not going to be satisfied as a team with his performance and with what he brings to the table as essentially protection for Mason Wynn in that spot. So, Brett, I really do appreciate the super chat there. I don't agree with the premise, though. I think Brenden Crawford, his spot is certainly safe for a little while. And, right, if you get into June, July, and you start to be able to really evaluate the performance and there are other questions going on, maybe something changes on that front. I'm not going to say it lasts forever, but I don't think we've seen really a sample to know whether he's been doing a good job or a bad job, right? It's just been like one game that he's gotten a chance to play. And I do understand the premise of the point as it pertains to Victor Scott, because I think he should be the center fielder for the foreseeable future as well. How long that lasts when you start to get guys coming back healthy is a fair question. We don't know when Tommy Edman's coming back healthy. That's the first thing I'm going to start with. I know he's supposed to have maybe an MRI later this week, perhaps Wednesday, I think it was, to add some clarity, hopefully, to what his timeline could look like, and maybe if there needs to be some sort of other intervention to address the wrist, or if it's going to be healing properly the way they wanted to on its own. But all that being said, right now, the way I at least mentally categorize the Tommy Edman situation is anything you get from him in the first half of the season is a bonus. If he's back sooner than that, fantastic. But I think mentally, as you're kind of mapping out this roster, that's at least the way I'm looking at it, right? I think Lars Nootbaar is going to be back imminently. There was a bit of a scare when it was reported because Memphis had put up the lineup, I guess, inadvertently, gotten it wrong, said that Lars Nootbaar in his rehab assignment was playing center field tonight. He wasn't. He was in left field. I think if he had been in center field, that is something to pay attention to, because for as much as we do like what Victor Scott is doing right now, his batting average, even after a game tonight where he reached base with that double, and man, was that fun to watch him fly around first base, not even hesitate for a moment, take second, and run on Tatis Jr. the way that he did. But what I was getting at is his average is still 136, right? He's got an OPS below 500. So the traditional statistics, it is only a 6-game sample size, but it is kind of, lacking in terms of, well, it's a low batting average, not powerful, things like that. I think if you're watching these games, though, you're pretty satisfied with the way Victor's handling himself. I don't subscribe to the idea that he's overmatched. He's going to strike out just like everybody else on the team is going to strike out. The Cardinals, through the first 5 games, had, I want to say it was 56 strikeouts through 5 games. So those aren't all Victor Scott II, right? He's got a handful of them, but those aren't all from him. And that's why I'm kind of looking at that going, I'm not going to nitpick this guy for striking out when basically everybody else in the lineup is doing it a lot too. He's making good contact when he does make contact, and we know that when he gets on base, there are things that he can do that other people cannot do. So for me, Victor Scott is a guy that I want to see get some run. To his credit, Michael Ciani did a nice job tonight as well. But when Lars Nootbaar returns, obviously there's not going to be playing time for both. And Ciani has already kind of been getting squeezed. Tonight was his first opportunity. You like what he can do defensively. I mentioned that he laid down the bunt when he was asked to do so early in the game. There were some good things that he did. But if I were making a roster move decision, I'm basically keeping Victor Scott. Going to wait and see what it looks like for Dylan Carlson and Tommy Edman. When one of those two come back, then you can maybe evaluate. But there is an extra gear to what Victor Scott brings to the table that I would hope the Cardinals would not overlook in the near future as it pertains to his presence on this roster. Brett, love to see a little bit of Whitey Herzog small ball from the Cardinals. Yeah, look, I thought that if you're going to do that, it's fine to do, and especially when it works out and you can get the execution from the players. Michael Ciani laying down the bunt, you have to still execute that play. Then all right, we've basically given up and out to put Victor Scott on third. Mason Wynn's got to deliver the sacrifice fly, and he did. That's really good small ball. I don't know if I love the idea of giving away the free outs and basically saying we're going to settle for one run this inning. However, when you execute it, it's kind of hard to argue with. Now, where it gets interesting to me is actually later in the game. This obviously didn't come back to hurt the Cardinals, but in the inning where they made the wholesale defensive changes, they took Donovan from second, moved him to left. They brought Gorman into the game, but he didn't pinch hit. He came in as a defensive replacement, and then they moved Siani from left to right, and it was Gorman actually coming in for Jordan Walker within the lineup structure so that they could get Walker out for defensive purposes. Siani is a good defensive outfielder, and so that did give them from left to right in the outfield a pretty good alignment, and Nolan Gorman has looked pretty good defensively at second base, so you felt just fine about having it go that way. What was interesting, though, is why don't they necessarily go with the same small ball mentality in that inning? I want to say it was around the seventh inning when it happened, where it was Victor Scott that, I'm trying to remember at this point. No, it was Jordan that got the double. Jordan Walker ends up on second base. Victor Scott could have bunted, and just like any of the other guys at the bottom of the order who have good speed, maybe you beat out the bunt base hit and you're able to kind of parlay that into a bigger inning. But if nothing else, you should be able to advance Jordan Walker to third, and now there's less than two outs, so you give, I guess it would have been at that time, Siani an opportunity to try and score the sacrifice fly. Now, maybe if it's a case of his skill set is not the same as Wynn's, to where they wouldn't have been confident for him to be able to pull that off, okay. But now you're in the late innings with a one-run lead, I believe it was at the time, and so you're looking to try and capitalize on anything that you can. That would have been the time to really sell out for just the one run. Obviously, later on, Yuki Matsui had multiple walks that he gave up, and so the Cardinals were able to score runs anyway later on in that eighth inning. But I just thought that was kind of interesting. If you're going to go for the small ball early, how come they don't do it late? The answer to that could be Michael Siani, different skill set than Mason Wynn in terms of being able to deliver that sacrifice fly. But I did think that was a little bit interesting, especially knowing that Victor Scott probably capable of laying a bunt down and maybe being able to beat it out to first base too. Jordan Walker being the base runner is a little bit different than when they did it previously, because obviously if Victor is your base runner, you feel very good about him advancing and making the play that needs to be made in terms of the foot speed. I don't think that Walker's a terrible base runner, but he doesn't obviously have the speed when we're talking about Victor Scott. So that was kind of my little thought about the small ball, but I knew that there would be some Cardinals fans that really enjoyed it. I think there were some that said, you know what, it's nice that you scored the run, but you're also settling for less than you could have had. So let me know in the comments, too, what you guys thought of that play. Is there a different vibe going on with Scott's spot on the team, knowing that they played Nootbaar in left as opposed to the previous report of a start in center? Yes, I think it does make a difference. Like, if Nootbaar's not playing center, it means, all right, they can take their time. Like, eventually they can play him in center, and that would be fine. But if they were playing him a bunch in center right now, that would spell something different to me. So what it spells is probably less good news for Siani's spot than it is for Victor, because I think Nootbaar will need just a couple games and he'll be ready. I don't think Victor will go out when Nootbaar comes up. I do think it gets more interesting when either Dylan or Tommy are ready to return. Like, what does it look like for Victor Scott at that point? Could be a different conversation.